Hello everyone, this is Kat. Welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. This will be the continuation of Paper Agency. This will be part 5. Hitoshi's parents lived in a high-rise condominium in Chandrilia Ward, which was in the cushy, gentrified bedroom community that served downtown Musutafu. It was tall, glass-sided, a monolith, and Hitoshi hadn't set foot inside it in a year and a half. Izuku squeezed his hand as they rode the elevator up. Tower had driven them out in a surprising show of support, but had been forced to wait in the parking lot with their rental car. "Trust me, this is for the best," Izuku had said. "He doesn't like your parents. If he gets a chance to punch somebody, it doesn't matter who, he will take it." It was kind of weird, hearing that level of support from someone he hadn't really known before that week. It was nice, though. Speaking of, he hadn't told Mike or Aizawa where they were going to pick up the remains of his stuff from his parents, but he wasn't convinced they wouldn't show up anyway. They knew he had a Friday deadline, and it was Friday. "Do you think that Tower would be willing to run interference if Mike or Aizawa show up?" he asked. "He already is," Izuku winked. "Nobody wants this to get ugly. We'll get in, get out, and then go decompress at a cat cafe or something. You know, I bet they'd like it if you just called them your dads." "Not this again," Hitoshi groaned. "Just something to think about." Izuku held his hands up in surrender. "You know, while you have to deal with your unfortunate gene donors." Ugh. Maybe he had a point. Whether his former teachers wanted that relationship with him aside, it would be a good thought to hold on to while he was back in the house. "Hey, Toshi." Izuku was shifting guiltily from side to side when Hitoshi looked his way. "If they start saying stuff, then I want you to let me handle it, okay?" "I can deal with them," Hitoshi protested. Izuku had met his parents a grand total of once, but that one time had been enough to cement them as mortal enemies. They'd all ended up in the same cafe once, and he and Izuku had been on a, not calling it a date, but it was a date, a bit before the point where they'd officially gotten together, and his parents had been out to get lunch. Hitoshi wasn't sure what happened other than the fact that the words were said, but he'd come back from the bathroom to find Izuku sitting by himself looking uncharacteristically grim. His parents were long gone. In the early days, Izuku had held out hope that Hitoshi and his parents were just having a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd been projecting his own situation onto Hitoshi's, but he'd stopped trying to float the idea of reconciliation after that. "I know you can," Izuku was saying, "but you shouldn't have to, and I really don't care about what they think, so it won't hurt me, like they can hurt you." Hitoshi was saved from answering or saying something that he'd probably regret about Izuku's mom when the elevator reached his parents' floor. "Here goes," he said instead. The carpet in the hallway had been updated since the last time he'd been by, and the building had swapped it out for gray and white marble tile, like it needed to be colder in there. His key card still worked, which was a surprise. It probably wouldn't after they left, assuming his mom didn't make him hand it over. Inside the condo was different, too, which was less of a surprise. Hitoshi's mom was an interior designer and owned a staging warehouse. Their place was usually furnished out of whatever was in style that year, and the warehouse didn't have room for. By that same token, stuff would disappear if his mom decided that she needed it for a project, whether it was hers or not. For a second he dared to hope that nobody was home. The Genkin was dark, and no other shoes were sitting in the empty tiled entrance, and the light from the living room came from the big picture windows that made up their exterior wall. "Hitoshi," a feminine voice called from deeper in the house. "Is that you?" He let out his breath. "It's me." His mom appeared a few seconds later. She looked much the same as she always had, the last time they'd talked face to face as well. Tall, slender, and dressed in a well-cut violet pantsuit. Her hair was shorter, and it was a lighter shade of lilac than he remembered. She had on makeup, and just the amount she typically wore around the house, but Hitoshi could not remember ever seeing her without it. "There you are." She smiled as though this was all perfectly normal. Maybe it was, for her, a logical conclusion to their relationship, with no need to be nasty about it, what she considered to be nasty anyway. "You cut it close." Her expression flickered as she took in Izuku standing just behind him. "Ah, your friend is welcome too." Her tone said his friend was not welcome to, but she knew that she wasn't getting out of it. "Thank you for having me," Izuku agreed much more politely than the situation called for. "Well," She's turned and strode into the house. "Your father is out right now. If there's anything that you can't find that you need him for, then just make sure to call by tonight." "I doubt I'll need to," Hitoshi murmured. His father didn't really concern himself with domestic details, which was probably a good thing for him considering the way the furniture had changed every few months. He was the type of high-powered sociopath who did very well in business. He was a regional sales director for some place that Hitoshi had never been very interested in, and, from what he gathered from his father's life, was a lot like the first part of American Psycho before all the murder stuff got started. If there was anything in the house that Hitoshi needed and he or his mother couldn't find it, then he'd just have to do without. Another surprise came from when he went into his old room. He'd expected to find exercise equipment in there, storage. There were boxes, but they had his old clothes and books from middle school in them. Hitoshi crouched down and ran his finger over the top of one, and his fingertip came back gray. The box had been packed a long time ago. "Well, if I ever wondered if they expected me to come back," he commented, "I guess I have my answer." "I'll take these downstairs," Izuku replied neutrally. "See if there's anything in the closet or your drawers." Hitoshi passed him the key card and started to poke around his old bedroom. There was more there than he remembered. Some vintage band posters that weren't too sun-bleached from the open window, a couple of hero magazines hidden under the mattress, his first and to date last pet's collar, a medal from grade school for winning a spelling contest, and All Might figurine that he had gotten once. He put all that into the duffel bag that he'd brought and did a cursory sweep of the actual storage closet. There wasn't anything there. He suspected his mom had done a sweep when he'd stopped coming home and contained all evidence of his existence into his former bedroom. What had Izuku said? His national health insurance card wasn't necessary. He had insurance through Watchtower now, and he would probably have to get a new card anyway if he ever changed jobs. The other thing was baby pictures. "Mom." Hitoshi stuck his head out into the hall. "Yes?" she called from the kitchen. She was making tea when he found her, a single cup. They were clearly not expected to stay long. "Do you still have any pictures of me when I was a kid?" He felt dumb asking. This was inviting some pain. Pictures weren't a part of his life growing up. His parents didn't appear as official functions like other people's family did. They didn't take pictures of him starting school or graduating. What photographic documentation he had of his own childhood came from school albums or when he appeared in the background of other people's. She thought about it, however. "I think so," she said at last. "They should be in the bottom shelf by the television." Surprised, Hitoshi went to look and was abruptly less shocked. There were 4 little photo albums on the shelf that were wedged in next to his dad's vinyl collection. The spines were labeled by year and stopped around the time that his quirk came in. That was pretty typical of his parents. Neither of them were naturally empathetic, and Hitoshi wondered if they exacerbated each other's worst tendencies. He already knew that their marriage was an acting of an echo-like chamber sometimes. Everyone in the world fit into 3 neat categories as far as Hitoshi's parents were concerned: heroes, villains, and civilians. What type of person you were was defined by your own quirk. They didn't have any illusions about their own. Hitoshi's dad had perfect pitch, and his mom's was a predictive ability called read the room. Neither quirk was all that powerful. His dad's voice was always on key, and his mom could sense how people would interact with an enclosed space, useful for their work, but otherwise unimpressive save for the way they combined to create a brainwash quirk. His parents had classified themselves as civilians, and that worked well for them. They were clear-cut rules and then expectations for normal Japanese families, an easy progression from birth to death if you paid attention. They'd done the right things. Worked to get into good schools, got well-paying jobs, got married, and had a child. It had all gone according to plan for them until Hitoshi came along, and they'd made sure that he knew it. Being the parents of a nascent villain did not fit well into the order of their lives. They'd never replaced him. But Hitoshi thought that they would have if his mom had ever gotten pregnant again. Maybe they'd just figured out that neither of them really liked kids, and Hitoshi made a good excuse to stop trying. He opened up one of the albums, and inside was the standard collection of baby photos. Baby Hitoshi asleep in the hospital, Hitoshi asleep in a variety of funny animal onesies, Hitoshi asleep in a lace-lined bassinet, Hitoshi asleep with a stuffed animal. There were no pictures of his parents in the album at all, he realized. The pictures that were there were all carefully posed. It was the same in the second album, which was much thinner than the first. The third followed suit, and the fourth only had a few portrait-style pictures in it. Izuku found himself staring at the last picture in the fourth album. It was a family group portrait, and Hitoshi hardly recognized himself. No one was smiling, or touching either, and he and his father stood on either side of his mother, who was seated in a wooden chair in front of a vague gray background. His hair was combed flat, and he was wearing a little sweater vest with a starched shirt underneath it. There shouldn't have been anything wrong with the shot, except Hitoshi couldn't stop staring at his own flat and motionless gaze. He looked dead inside, not the way that people joked about when they were tired or overwhelmed, but actually devoid of inner life. How do you do that to a 4-year-old? Hitoshi didn't like kids, but even he knew that they were supposed to be happy little goblins at that age, just discovering their own agency and getting into everything. No wonder people thought I could be an infant villain. He thought, and he closed the album harder than necessary. He looked like an evil marionette next to 2 vampires. Most people who gave a shit about his quirk didn't really think that he was a villain. It was an easy soft spot that they could exploit. He had never really used his quirk on a civilian person without consent after he'd gotten control of it, but there were other people, ones who made their decision about Hitoshi after they'd met his parents and talked to them long enough to realize how deeply wrong they were inside. Those people believed it, and they were truly afraid of him. "Hitoshi," Izuku crouched down next to him. "Do you need to leave?" "I'm done here." He was more than done. He was ready to walk out that door and never look back. He shoved the albums in his bag. The odds that he would ever want to look at those pictures again were slim, but they were still his and he was taking them. His mom looked up from the magazine that she'd been perusing while drinking her tea. "Got everything?" "Seems like it." Hitoshi wondered how this would go. This was going to be goodbye forever. His dad wasn't even there. "Oh, before I forget." She retrieved a white envelope from the kitchen where it had been stuck to the fridge with a magnet. He hadn't noticed before, but the envelope had his name on it. "There, that's for you." With extreme reluctance, Hitoshi stuck his thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside was... He looked up to gauge his mother's expression. No, she was serious. "You know what?" He turned to Izuku. "You were right, and I was wrong. Take over, please." Izuku looked at the paper from Hitoshi's unresisting fingers, and he scanned it. "Ah," he sighed like he was disappointed but not really surprised. "There it is." "Everything's there." His mom didn't seem to realize just how fucked up the situation was, which was in character at least. "Room, board, and tuition. We adjusted for inflation, of course, and the interest rate is pretty reasonable. We'd prefer cash, and that would probably be easiest for you. Your sort is always so clever, but if you need to do a wire transfer, then your dad can work something out. Do you think that you can have it all by next week?" His sort. His sort. She was expecting him to steal the money. "You..." Hitoshi started to snarl, but drew up short as his boyfriend stopped him with a hand on his chest. "Sue us." Izuku smiled as he said it. There was something subtly different about the way he held himself, and abruptly Hitoshi realized they were in the room with Watchman right now. And not Izuku anymore. "I beg your pardon." She drew herself up in an offended dignity. "I said sue us." He repeated himself slower, as though talking to a small child in a non-native speaker. "We can certainly do that." He couldn't actually think of her as his mother anymore, not when she just presented him with a bill for his upbringing. She huffed and crossed her arms. "If Hitoshi is comfortable with that level of media scrutiny." "If you think that he's the one who would come out of that situation looking bad, then this is going to be even funnier than I thought it would be." Izuku held up the bill, and he snapped a picture of it with his phone. Unlike Mike's phone camera, Izuku didn't make a sound or a flash like it usually did. He'd turned off the sound effects just for this visit? If so, then what else had he been photographing? "Children aren't obligated to reimburse their parents for the cost of raising them. You'll have a hard enough time making your case in front of a judge, then that's even without the blatant fraud." Izuku turned the paper to show her. "You listed charges for time that he didn't even live with you." She sniffed. "It's part of the social contract. A child repays their upbringing by caring for their parents when they get older. Obviously, Hitoshi will be in jail or dead by that point, so it's only fair he repays us now." She said it like it was a foregone conclusion and not one that she'd ever lost sleep on. "Not according to the law, so I repeat, sue us." Izuku folded the bill, tucked it back into the envelope, and slid it into his pocket. "Personally, I can't wait, especially when it comes out that you tried extortion first. That was what you meant, right? That he should steal the money for you? That barb flew true and hit hard. She recoiled from them both. I never said that. She said it hastily, in a tone that would never be believed. No, you just implied it heavily. Izuku agreed, and he gently herded Hitoshi toward the door. We're going. Have a good life, Shinzo-san. Hitoshi was numb and frozen until they hit the corridor. The door shut behind them, and Izuku took a mini recorder out of his pocket and he hit the stop button. It's probably not going to be admissible, and I didn't get a clear admission of malfeasance anyway. He sighed, chivying Hitoshi on towards the elevator. We can use it to file an incident report with the police. It'll be easier to get them laughed out of court if we establish a pattern of harassment now. That reminds me, can I get a screenshot of that text that she sent you? Hitoshi hardly believed that he was about to ask, but did you know that she was going to do this? That stopped him. Izuku looked at him and shook his head sadly. It was Izuku, too, his regular everyday boyfriend and not his strange boss. No, I was sure they'd pull something, just not what, he admitted. Your dad said something once about you being a long-term investment. It was a while ago, and I was hoping I was either wrong or that I was letting the fact that I really don't like him influence me. Also, Izuku added after a pause, I think that scheme was mostly your dad. There was someone hiding in the master bedroom. I heard the mattress squeak, and you mentioned that they don't keep pets. They don't have a leg to stand on, and he's the one most likely to know that coercion is a criminal offense. Threatening you with the media could also count as blackmail, depending on how a lawyer built the case. If he wasn't home, then he could claim that he wasn't involved. That actually sounded plausible. Not only plausible, but in character. They'd need to check the math on that bill, too, although Hitoshi wanted nothing more than to throw it in the trash. Every time that he thought his parents couldn't get crazier, they proved him wrong. Let's just go. He waited until they were in the elevator to reach for his boyfriend's hand. Thanks. Izuku blinked at him. For what? Like he genuinely had no idea. For having your head in there. Hitoshi leaned back against the mirrored wall of the elevator, and he tucked their joined hands into his pocket. It was going to be a while before he could let go. When I couldn't. Izuku was quiet for a while. You got between me and Kachan. He leaned into Hitoshi's side. At the club. No one ever did that before. Well, of course Hitoshi realized the point that Izuku was trying to make. They rode the rest of the way down in contemplative silence. Not to alarm you, but someone's on the roof outside your window. I know. And you're okay with it? It's a Razorhead. Present Mike was following me around earlier, too, when I was giving notice. It's fine, they probably are just working up to a shovel talk. Aw, empty nester syndrome. Fucking adorable. Seriously, though, I will roust him if you want. Just come inside. The food will get cold if you keep pretending to loiter downstairs. 10-4. Mike and Aizawa were home, and when Hitoshi let himself into the house around mid-morning, you wouldn't think Aizawa would have been up, considering how late a night he'd had, but he was sitting at the kitchen table reading something on his tablet when he and Mike had worked through a pot of coffee. Hey, stranger, Mike grinned as Hitoshi went over to join them. Did you find some time for us old people? Well, I thought you might have gotten lonely. Hitoshi set his jacket on the back of the chair that he privately considered his. Since Aizawa came over to visit us last night. Hitoshi had gotten lucky. Erasure was tied to Aizawa's emotional state. He had control of it for the most part, but it still activated sometimes when something ticked him off, and in the right conditions the glow could carry quite a distance. The dark space between Izuku's building and the one next door wasn't all that far either. Aizawa didn't react. He just took a slow sip of his coffee, and he set down his tablet while Mike face-palmed, looking resigned. Patrolling, huh, Shota? He sighed. You don't have a lot of room to point fingers. Hitoshi met Mike's gaze until he dropped it guiltily. Izu made you. I made Aizawa. That was a minor fib. Izuku hadn't spotted Aizawa, but his sophisticated counter-surveillance system had, right as Hitoshi caught a glimpse of two angry red pinpricks from the rooftop across from their open balcony. Kid's got good instincts, Aizawa allowed. Did you see the laser microphone? They had not, but Hitoshi couldn't remember them talking about anything too sensitive. They hadn't talked about Watchtower, or Izu's alter ego. In fact, all he could remember them talking about was the fall of that disastrous visit with his parents and why the last season of So You Want to Be an Idol was garbage. Well, that explained what had gotten Aizawa so pissed off. "Don't you usually spend the first week of summer break in a coma?" Hitoshi complained. "We're dealing with it." "Sounds like your parents are blackmailing you into villainy." Aizawa was a bit like a cat, not in the warm, cuddly, purring way. He was the kind of cat that stared at you for impossibly long periods of time without blinking, and sometimes pushed it off to counters to remind you that he could. He liked you and all. He just wasn't a comfortable sort of person. "They're trying to," Hitoshi admitted. "Badly. Izu was there when they tried it. He basically laughed in their faces and dared them to sue. I kind of wish that you'd been there, in retrospect. It was magical." It had been awful at the time, but his memory kept replaying the astounded look on his mom's face, and it got funnier each time he remembered. She was so used to being able to bulldoze her way through anything with a smile that her reaction to running up against his tiny, immovable object of a boyfriend was comedy gold. "I'm glad that, among other things, that your young man has experience as a lawyer." Aizawa exchanged an impenetrable look with Mike. "Although he seems to have fewer jobs now." Right, Mike had been tailing them. Maybe he sucked at being subtle, but he could charm birds down out of the trees if he wanted. It would have been the work of seconds for him to figure out what they'd been doing at each stop. "Yeah, he does." Hitoshi couldn't hide his smile at that. It wasn't that he didn't understand why Izuku had done the things he had. They'd talked about more the logistics of being a reconnaissance hero, and a lot of it came down to money, support equipment, bribes, and occasional witness relocations. All that made sense, but Hitoshi still didn't like sharing. Hero work would probably expand to fill up that freed time. At least it would be work worthy of being done. "Not going to expand on that?" Aizawa probed. "You do remember that course we did on identifying and interpreting deviations in normal civilian behavior, right? Young man suddenly showing up, hurt, quitting his job without another one waiting. That's not ringing any alarms for you." "Nah." Hitoshi took a moment to enjoy the mad tick underneath Aizawa's eye. It was kind of nice being the one in the know. "I know what he's up to. It's fine." Izuku had given him permission to talk about Watchman if it became necessary during his contract negotiations, but it wasn't necessary yet, and he kind of liked playing information keep away, and it was nice revenge for Aizawa following him around with spy equipment. "If you say so. You know you can come to us if it's suddenly not fine." Aizawa frowned as Mike's phone pinged. It wasn't the normal bell chime, but a flat beep, and Mike stiffened. He picked up his phone and sighed. "Well, there's some timing." He sighed and showed the screen to Aizawa, who scowled. "What's up?" Hitoshi didn't like the sudden mood shift. They'd been playfully annoyed before, but this was real unhappiness now. Mike sighed. "Obsessed fan," he explained. "Or anti-fan in this case. It happens sometimes when you're mainstream. This one, though, got my personal cell and email." "Is your agency doing anything?" Memories of their sessions on stalkers scrolled behind Hitoshi's eyes. Legally speaking, they occupied the worst intersection between civilians and villains, but they couldn't hurt you like a villain. But unless they threatened your family or neighbors, then you couldn't defend yourself to the full extent of your abilities. Threatening a pro wasn't the same as threatening a regular person. "No physical threats yet, no evidence of surveillance, just nasty emails." Aizawa replied shortly. "The police can't do anything, not right now, and no one else has time." "Huh. Do you want me to ask Watchman to look into it?" he asked. Izuku was a bit between some big cases, so he'd have a bit more time to dedicate to something like this and the renovation, but Hitoshi was pretty sure that he'd make the time even if he wasn't. "It's a little early for you to be asking your boss for favors." Mike's smile was way too sad to belong on his face. "I've dealt with this kind of thing before. It'll be fine." Making a snap decision, Hitoshi lifted Mike's phone off of him. It was still unlocked, and right away he realized something was wrong. The little device was running hot even though it was on the home screen. The text message in question was basically an angry, gibberish accusation of Mike being a fake. Hitoshi spotted a few more texts, like it was obviously spoofed numbers in Mike's text history. The common thread amongst them was the word fake. Fake hero, fake man, fake celebrity. They were really hammering that one word, which suggested this was a deliberate psychological attack rather than some anonymous trolling. Whoever it was had either lucked onto the one angle of attack that might actually hurt present Mike, or they knew their target. He was mainstream, yeah, but he kept his private life private. Very private. Even in his most devoted fans, they rarely recognized him out of his costume. "Hey now!" Mike grabbed for it, and Hitoshi held him off with another hand as he opened the phone's task manager. There were no background apps running that he could see, but something was making the device work hard. "I wouldn't be so sure about that no evidence of surveillance thing," Hitoshi said as he powered it down. He wasn't a tech-savvy person. He knew a few things to look out for. From his time locked in a lab with Hatsume, he gave it back to Mike before things got serious. "Something's making your processor overheat. Don't turn that back on until I say." "You think it's hacked?" Aizawa's hair lifted a few centimeters off his shoulders, the only evidence of his feelings on the matter. "Maybe." Hitoshi thought about it. Mike had a serious business, heroics-grade smartphone. There were a lot of security features on it that were built in. It wasn't invulnerable, though. "You said there were emails. Maybe power off Mike's computer, too." "I'll go." Mike surprised him by getting up at once to follow his suggestion. No hesitation, no arguments, no patronization. They were taking him seriously. Aizawa waited until Mike was gone. "Do you really think that Watchman has time for this?" His hair dropped down, and he slumped back into his seat. "Izashi's more bothered than he's letting on. I'd owe your boss a favor if he can look into it." He kind of already did, even though he didn't know it, but Izuku wasn't likely to cash in on that marker. Hitoshi was already dialing. "I think he's more interested in friends than favors." Izuku answered right away. "Hey, how'd it go?" "Watchman, it's Siren." Hitoshi could almost feel the quality of Izuku's silence shift. "Do you have time to look into something for my dad's?" There was no hesitation. "Absolutely. What's the situation?" Hitoshi outlined his observations, and Izuku made thoughtful noises, but otherwise didn't interrupt his report. It was kind of nice. He was used to his classmates and his work-study mentors, who sometimes had to be made to listen. This whole business of being treated like a competent professional was weird. He technically hadn't even started work yet. Well, Izuku had said that they had to find their own projects. Maybe he just did. "Is that computer tied to your security system there?" he asked, once Hitoshi had run dry of things to say. Yikes. If Hitoshi understood what Izu was getting at, there was a possibility the stalker might have tried to hack into the house's surveillance system. Fortunately, he knew the answer. "No, they're on an isolated system. There's a network connection, but it's more like a dead man's switch. If the security system loses connection, then the silent alarm will go off, and the local hero agencies and police stations will be alerted." "Good." He could hear the relief in Izuku's voice. "I'll let Hideo know what's up and swing by with a sandbox to take a look at Mike's phone and computer. Do you need me to come in costume?" "Nah, we might as well stick with Plan A." They were already suspicious, and Hitoshi knew that Mike and Aizawa could keep a secret. Plus, if they were under watch, then it was less weird for Izuku, Hitoshi's boyfriend, to show up at the house than Watchman, unrelated pro-hero. "I'll read them in while you're on the way." "All right." Izuku paused. "I won't let anyone hurt your family," he said softly, sincerely. "They'd have to get through me first." Hitoshi replied to hide the fact that he'd just been stabbed in the heart. "Yeah, that's what I worry about," Izuku said. "I'll be there in 20. Hitoshi was not prepared to find Mike and Aizawa staring at him when he disconnected the call and turned around. Aizawa was still at the table, mug frozen halfway between his mouth and the table. Mike was standing just beyond the breakfast nook and holding the wall like he needed it to keep upright. "What?" was all he got out before Mike swept him up into a bear hug. "No takebacks, kiddo," he rasped, barely audible and further muffled by Hitoshi's hair. Abruptly, Hitoshi remembered what he'd said. He hadn't even been thinking. Usually he could censor himself and keep his real thoughts private, but... He tried to say something, and he just got squeezed harder. "No takebacks," Mike repeated, only louder. "Okay." Hitoshi returned the hug, and he wondered how he'd missed this. Damn it, Izuku had been right the entire time. He was going to be such a shit about it, too. Aizawa had gotten up from the table at some point and was watching them with the same soft look that Hitoshi remembered from graduation. Hitoshi awkwardly opened one arm, inviting him into the hug. Aizawa didn't take it, but he did squeeze Hitoshi's shoulder once, almost as hard as Mike's hug. Then he casually said, with all the air of a cat that's casually knocking something expensive off the shelf, knowing that he was about to unleash hell and doing it anyway, Dibs on Dad. Mike shrieked, and both of them recoiled. You can't call dibs. Looks like I just did. Aizawa drawled, and he took a slow pull from his mug to hide his creepy grin. Hitoshi, tell him. Well, you've had an affectionate nickname this whole time. Hitoshi did not try to pretend that he didn't like pulling Mike's chain almost as much as his husband did. Mike clutched his heart with his free hand, but did not release Hitoshi from his hug. You used the plural. We're both Dad. How would you two tell who I'm talking to? Hitoshi laughed as Mike pouted. We'll figure it out from the context, or you can just point. He finally let go and pushed his bangs out of his face. This is great. I don't have to pretend not to hate your parents anymore. That was news to Hitoshi. You do? Toshi, if I could get away with burning their house down, I probably would. Mike answered him seriously. I never understood the appeal of villainy until I met those two. They're awful and we tried to take you away, but they weren't awful enough, or they were the wrong kind of awful. I don't know. The judge felt like they were doing enough, and that Shota already had partial custody of you through the dorm agreements, which gave you the option of sheltering here when you needed to. He paused and grimaced. We may have gone a little beyond that, but your parents were supposed to keep up with things aside from tuition, things like clothing. Obviously, they didn't, and we just couldn't ignore it. Hitoshi abruptly wondered if it had been his parents sending him pocket money for the last year. You don't have to pretend like you like them. Nobody else does. Izuku was pretty sure that his mom was actually afraid of Izuku. Well, we were afraid that you still wanted them, Mike admitted. It's a natural impulse, even when your parents aren't very good for you, and we didn't want you or anyone else to think that we were trying to alienate you from them. No danger of that. They did that themselves. Hitoshi's tone didn't really match his words. He felt light, buoyant even. He wanted to call Izuku and tell him. His head snapped up as he remembered exactly what he was supposed to be doing just as the doorbell rang. Huh, it's Midoriya, Aizawa comments, looking at the door feed through his watch. Did you two have plans? Hitoshi couldn't form words. I'll go. He tried again. Watchman's on his way, right? Mike asked. I mean, I heard that correctly. You should probably be here when he arrives, Toshi. Hitoshi managed a panic nod before kicking himself. I'll let Midoriya know that you need to reschedule. Aizawa was already moving. Hitoshi tripped over his own words, trying to follow. This was going to be bad. Worse, it was going to be awkward, and once the dust settled, he was never, ever going to live it down. Izuku smiled as Aizawa opened the door. He was dressed a bit normally for him, than the last time they'd seen him. He had on his usual cargo shorts and compression sleeve paired with the most obnoxious All Might hoodie that was imaginable. Hitoshi recognized it. It was the one with the stuffed bangs on the hood, and he was carrying a sort of suitcase-looking thing that he held up for Aizawa's inspection. Hey, I brought some equipment to look over Mike-san's electronics. Beg your pardon? Hitoshi did not give Aizawa time to ask any more potentially terrible questions and herded him away from the door. We got distracted. I didn't tell them. Izuku, the jerk, just laughed. They heard you call them Dad, didn't they? Of course he picked up on that, and he hadn't said anything. The whole pro-hero thing was adding a whole new dimension to their relationship, and Hitoshi was still divided on whether or not he liked it. Yeah, you told me so, Hitoshi griped. Just get in here and tell me if Mike's phone is bugged or not. I did tell you so. Izuku held out a hand to Aizawa. We weren't properly introduced before. I'm Watchman. Aizawa accepted the handshake, looking like he expected to be bitten. You, he said slowly, are a pro. As of this week, Izuku agreed, and Hitoshi had to marvel at the way Izu was slipping answers into the short conversation to questions Aizawa hadn't had the time to ask. I apprenticed under Red Tower before that. Of course you did. Aizawa closed his eyes, pinched the bridge of his nose, and he waved them inside. I need more coffee. If anyone wants some, speak now. Yes, please. Hitoshi groaned as he shepherded Izuku into the living room where Mike had met them with his phone and laptop. This is a surprising twist. Mike didn't hesitate to hand over his devices as Izuku sat down. Hitoshi didn't tell us he knew Watchman personally. Hitoshi coughed and turned red. To give Izuku credit, he only blushed. It was a fluke, he admitted. I was in the Cape Closet during my apprenticeship, and Hideo's my senior partner, so he took point on hiring when we got the grant to expand Watchtower. Aizawa paused on his way in from the kitchen and was with 4 mugs of coffee, 2 in each hand. You let Red Tower have complete control of recruitment? Good to know that, given a choice between Red Tower and an actual 18-year-old, not even Aizawa thought that Tower was the adult in the relationship. He also hired the kid who used to beat me up in middle school. I learned my lesson. Izuku accepted the mug with one hand, and he opened his metal suitcase with the other. On the inside, it looked like a laptop with the bottom half that was split into a keyboard and a docking port. He plugged the phone in, and the screen had lit up. Sandy, do a diagnostic on this phone. A string of green light had illuminated the screen, and a woman's voice replied. Scanning. It took a second, and then a window popped up with a report in plain text. It might as well have been a text in Greek for all Hitoshi could interpret it. Izuku took his time reading through while making thoughtful noises. Well, you've got a keylogger on here for sure, he said after a while. That was bad. Present Mike coordinated a lot between other heroes, mainly via text. It was why he'd invested so heavily in his own digital protection. Among other things. The good news is that the security hardware in your phone prevented the programs from transmitting what they'd already collected. I think the only original hack was successful, and everything else I'm seeing are attempted patches meant to circumvent the phone's security features so they could retrieve their data. That's why it's running so hot. You've got a lot going on under that hood. Do you want me to clean it out for you? Yes, but don't you need all that? Mike waved an unsure hand at the screen. To track down who's doing this. Maybe, but you need this phone for work. Izuku tapped out a series of coded commands on the sandbox as he explained. At least one of your enemy's goals is likely to reduce your effectiveness as a hero. I'll catch them one way or the other, but in the meantime my goal is to deny their victories. You're very confident for a new hero, Aizawa observed. It's not a very sophisticated attack, Izuku replied absently. Some of these techs have attachments. Do you mind if I look at them, Mike-san? Go ahead, Mike frowned. I haven't looked at any. I at least know that much. Good. You'd be surprised at how many people don't. I'm only doing this since we have Sandbox handy. I wouldn't try it outside of an isolated system. He transferred several files from a directory that apparently represented Mike's phone. The computer threw up several alarm pop-ups, and Izuku ran the files through several arcane-looking programs until he was able to open them safely. When he did, everyone at the table leaned away. Well, Izuku zoomed in on one of the most recent pictures, a snapshot of Mike, Aizawa, and Hitoshi all walking into the restaurant that they had chosen after graduation together. He clicked on the picture and flipped it over to display the file's metadata, which included the photograph's creation date. We've got a time and a place. I wonder if we have a suspect smart enough to stay away from security cameras. They had not. There was a Lawson Konbini located across from the restaurant that they were at, and their corporate offices regularly complied with hero investigations. Izuku had a few hours' worth of security footage uploaded to his personal cloud on HeroNet in 40 minutes, by which point he'd cleared Mike's laptop for duty. Subtle, Hitoshi commented as they watched a nervous guy with a dirt beard take a picture of him and his dad's from behind. What if he's somebody's patsy? He's probably just the first step of a larger investigation, Izuku sighed. It's enough to take to the police, though. They can open an investigation with this. Maybe it's a disgruntled fan, but Mike-san's a BFG. They'll have to make sure it's nothing, and if they have to go that far, then they'll want to make an arrest. BFG? Hitoshi didn't recognize the acronym. It means big, freaking gun. Mike work as a cone-shaped area of effect that works best on groups, Mike explained, although Hitoshi very much doubted the F actually meant freaking. I do a lot of media representation and coordination, but my quirk isn't great for patrolling, too much potential for collateral damage and civilian injury. Instead, I'm on call a few times a year for building clearing operations. Sometimes I lead the breaching teams. I'm good for clearing thresholds and transitional areas. It's why I have time for teaching and my radio show. There aren't a lot of heroes in the region with that kind of ability, and they aren't called on all that often, but the Hero Commission is sure to lean on the investigators to make sure that this isn't someone setting up for a big event. BFGs are a high-priority target for terrorists, but that kind of prep work can get farmed out to smaller, local, and less professional organizations, so you can't look at our perp and dismiss the entire threat. Musutafu has seen an increase in villain organization in the past few years. It's not an irrational fear. Hitoshi was kind of proud of Izuku as he talked. When they'd met, that whole spiel would have been a creepy stream of consciousness as a mumble. At some point, he'd realized the things he had to say were really worth listening to. Holy shit, kid. Mike looked at Hitoshi. I like this one. You can keep him. Thanks. I was planning on it. All right, everyone. This concludes part 5 of Paper Agency. I'll be back with part 6. Hope you guys are still enjoying this one. And as always, thank you so much for listening.